and good afternoon and welcome everyone to this latest edition of our Indic chat. And this time I'm delighted to have with us Hindal Sengupta. And Hindal, as you know, is a prolific author. He's also an editor at large at Fortune India magazine. And in 2017, he was named a Young Global Leader by the World Economic Forum. And this year, he became the first Indian to receive the Wilbur Award for his book, Being Hindu. He became the first Indian to receive this award for, in this very, very prestigious category. In 2016, he came out with his book on Swami Vivekananda called The Modern Monk. And last year, he came out with a book on Guru Gobind Singh, the last of the Sikh gurus, called The Sacred Sword. And this year, his book is out on it's available for pre-order online on Amazon and other sites. It is on the Iron Man of India, and it is titled The Man Who Saved India, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel. So Hindal, on this very, very apt occasion, welcome to this Indic chat.
Abhinav, what a delight to see you again. Thank you very much. I'm absolutely pleased to be here today, and happy Independence Day to you, and happy Independence Day to the Indic Academy and its worldwide, should I say, family of followers of Indic thought. I am hugely privileged that you've invited me, and I'm delighted to be here.
Thank you, and the pleasure is likewise, Hindal. And for our viewers and listeners who have tuned in, I'd like to also tell them that you can follow Hindal on Twitter. He's on Hindal Sengupta, I believe. I would also strongly encourage you to please also follow Indic Academy on Twitter at Indic Academy, and the Indic Book Club at the Indic Book Club. So with that, let's get started. My first question to you, Hindal, would be that, we have had a few books that have been written on Sardar Patel, including one by Rajmohan Gandhi, by Balraj Krishna. So why another book on Sardar Patel?
Well, Abhinav, very simply, if you look at these two books that you mentioned, both Balraj Krishna and Rajmohan Gandhi, they were all nearly 20 to 30 years ago. They were fairly old books. And if you look at the trajectory of the number of books that have been published, there are three real figures of Indian independence. Indian independence rests on three pillars: Jawaharlal Nehru, Mahatma Gandhi, and Sardar Patel. And there are numerous books, really numerous books about Patel, about Gandhi and Nehru, but Patel is missing in the picture. There are very few books on Patel. Even you could only think of 2 books in 70 years about Patel. And I really felt that here was a man who actually built the map of India as we understand it today. He is the man who built what we see as Indian, really the Indian cartographic imagination, should I say. The map itself was built by Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, painstakingly joining more than 500 princely states of India to what at that time was called British India. Nobody could have done this apart from Patel. And for Indians to know so little about the man who actually built state by state their very map was a shameful thing. And my book, therefore, is called The Man Who Saved India, because we do not recognize that Patel, Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, was the man who really saved India. That's why this book, and long awaited, should I say, maybe it should have been written decades ago, but I got an opportunity to write about it today, and so I wrote it.
Very nice, and that brings me to my first question, which is that, first is, if you very rightly pointed out that the key people who had this very pivotal role to play in the integration of India and the independence of India were, as you said, Mahatma Gandhi, Pandit Nehru, and Sardar Patel. And you delve, in some detail in your book on the relationship between these three people. And my first question to you is that, given the age differences between Sardar Patel and Pandit Nehru, and the fact that Patel was only about 6 years younger to Mahatma Gandhi, you do hint that that perhaps played a role in the dynamic and the lens through which Mahatma Gandhi viewed the two, one as more of a compatriot, a brother, and the other one more as a son?
Absolutely. Let's begin, though, by realizing that Sardar Patel's birthday is something that he invented himself. You would realize that at that time in the 19th century, a lot of people didn't really know when or which day they were actually born. In Patel's case, he himself accepted that he actually, in a sense, made up his October birthday in 1875. However, we do know that he was born perhaps roughly in that period, give or take a year or two. So yes, he was more of a contemporary of Gandhi, should I say. And of course, Nehru was much younger. So Gandhi almost had, in a sense, a paternal relationship with Jawaharlal Nehru. Though even Patel, in a sense, saw Gandhi as a father figure. Because remember, when Gandhi died, Patel wept at the feet of Gandhi and said that, Kasturba and Gandhi were the only real parents he had ever known, because he had lost his parents early in life, right? So there was definitely a distinct difference between Patel's relationship with Gandhi and Nehru's relationship with Gandhi. However, we also have to remember that these people, these three men and many others in the national movement, their relationships with their family was always slightly difficult. In Gandhi's case, his relationship both with his wife and his children used to be quite difficult. I mentioned that in great detail in my book. Same with Nehru, even though, of course, Nehru actually had the best relationship with his daughter than many others. Patel had a difficult relationship with his children. I mentioned that in the book too. So the national movement ensured that these men were really family to each other, right, in more ways than one. So therefore, it's a very interesting dynamic. As you can understand, Abhinav, we often love and hate our family in equal measure, all at the same time. And I think you see that in the lives of these men too.
Very true, very true. And, the second, I'd like to talk about Sardar Patel's he was not a man known to smile or laugh too much. He was a serious man. He was a serious man, but on the other hand, he did have a very, very dry sense of humor and a dry wit. In this sense, I want to touch upon the fact that when Mahatma Gandhi decided to take the freedom movement national, he realized that lots of money would be needed for that. And it fell upon Sardar Patel to really, work the magic and canvas for funds. And in your book, you write that Ghanshyam Das Birla once, in a conversation with Patel, said that Mahatma Gandhi wasn't too happy about raising funds and so on. And I do not like the Sardar collecting money from businessmen, is what G.D. Birla quoted Gandhi as saying to Sardar Patel. And Sardar Patel's reply was very characteristic of the man. He said, "This is not his concern." Sardar Patel said, "Gandhi is a Mahatma, I am not. I have to do the job." And he did in a way, didn't he? In taking Gandhi's vision and actually implementing it. And you write about the three key agitations at that time in Kheda, Bardoli, and one more place. You want to talk about the first such agitation that Sardar Patel really got involved with?
Absolutely. You see, you touch upon a very interesting subject, Abhinav. You see, the national movement was a gigantic task. It needed a lot of money. But who would raise that money? Gandhi wanted to be austere, as is famously also said about Gandhi, that it took a fortune to keep Gandhi in poverty. Pandit Nehru wanted to be socialist and not have much to do with the capitalist and the industrialist. But who then would raise money for this gigantic national movement? As always, it was Sardar Patel. He was the man who was practical, pragmatic, and the man who raised thousands and thousands of rupees, lakhs of rupees for the national movement. And that's why he had a very good relationship with the Indian industrialists. That's another place where he and Nehru differed a lot. But the Sardar was very clear, as you mentioned. He famously said, "The Gandhiji is a Mahatma, Gandhi is a Mahatma. I am not, I have to do my job." Also, I'd say in my book, which you must have read, that Ghanshyam Das Birla once famously said that essentially I just get a note from Sardar Patel on how much money I have to give, and I just give it quietly, right? So there had to be a man who would do this job for the Congress, and it was Patel who did it. That's why from very early on, whether it's the Kheda Satyagraha or the Bardoli Satyagraha, the management of this entire thing fell upon Patel. He was the guy who actually delivered these Satyagraha movements on the ground.
And to that end, you also write that it was Sardar Patel he was so successful in organizing these grassroots level agitations was because he had built an unparalleled network of informants right from the ground up, who gave him basically an hour by hour update on all that was happening.
Yes.
And let me talk a little bit about and ask you about the agitation at Bardoli, because when reading about it again, it struck me that very little has changed in the almost 90 years since that agitation first took place, where the agitation was really about dacoits, the menace of dacoits, and the fact that the British government was hand in glove with those dacoits. So it just struck me that nothing little has changed on the ground even today. If you look at the reality of how so-called dacoits and their being in cahoots with the government. How did the Sardar tackle that?
Yeah, Bardoli was, of course, about two things. One, of course, was taxation. As you know, land tax. That was a big thing. And of course, as you mentioned, this entire allied dacoits issue. See, Bardoli really is a very interesting movement because it was really the Sardar who rolled out the Bardoli movement, right? Gandhi was for a large part in prison. So the Sardar actually rolled out. And remember, that's one of the differences between Nehru and Patel. Patel till the end was a man of the peasants. He really understood Gujarat's peasantry really well. He had a great hold in that entire region. And therefore, he could really deliver Bardoli in a particular way so that it could be rolled out completely effectively. He was the man who showed his prowess at Bardoli as a person who had the logistical and the ability to roll out a movement, and also could gather momentum among vast numbers of people and keep them committed over a period of time to a movement. This would later prove invaluable when the Congress began to do this other national mass movement.
So coming back to the relationship between Gandhi, Nehru, and Patel, I'd like to ask you that Pandit Nehru ended up becoming the Congress Party president 4 times.
Yes.
Starting first in I think the late 1920s or 1930 or thereabouts, and even then, where the rank and file of the Congress Party had a clear preference for Sardar Patel, it was Motilal Nehru's slight nudge to the Mahatma that led to Sardar Patel being sidelined for the first time. Can we see the beginnings of dynastic rule really in the Nehru family, show their first face then?
Absolutely. I mentioned this very clearly in my book. After the Bardoli Satyagraha, Motilal Nehru himself wrote to Gandhiji saying that perhaps Sardar Patel is the best man for the job of Congress president because he has just delivered a huge success in the Bardoli Satyagraha to the Congress. However, the entire point was that he said if the Sardar is not to be considered, then Jawaharlal Nehru should be given an opportunity. It's a very clever and twisted thing to say. And Gandhiji being the ultimate politician, he basically found a quick middle path and chose Motilal Nehru himself rather than either Jalal or Sardar Patel, because he knew if he chose Jawaharlal Nehru at that point instead of Sardar Patel, he might not be acceptable to most people within the Congress party. So he chose Motilal Nehru. In a sense, and there was this famous moment later on again when Gandhiji chooses Nehru instead of Patel, that Swarup Rani, Gandhiji's mother, is so delighted and so very happy that the throne, so to speak, of Congress president has moved finally from one generation of the Nehrus to another generation of the Nehrus. And of course, there were many other people who became Congress president, but that, of course, this kind of transfer of power in one family became more solidified much later. As you know, Panditji accepted the Bharat Ratna as a sitting Prime Minister, thereby showing the path for his daughter also to accept the Bharat Ratna. Indira Gandhi accepted it too. And nobody has ever been able to give me a clear response that why did Pandit Nehru, who people say was a modest man about power, why did he accept the Bharat Ratna? And why did he start the precedent of getting India's highest civilian honor as a sitting Prime Minister? And why did it take so long? You know, decades passed before Sardar Patel was given the Bharat Ratna. So all of this, in a sense, starts at that point.
So among the 4 times that Pandit Nehru became the Congress Party president, I think the most contentious and the most debated one is the one in 1946, where once again, where the Congress Party had a clear preference for Sardar Patel, it was Pandit Nehru who became the Congress Party president, again at the insistence of Mahatma Gandhi. Now, later on, you write in your book that Maulana Azad ruled this as the single greatest blunder of his life. He writes, and I'm sort of paraphrasing, that having Nehru as the Congress Party president in 1946 and therefore as a prime minister was the single greatest blunder of my life. Why did Maulana Azad have such a change in heart just a few years later?
Well, because, these were all internal politics within the Congress, right? And Maulana Azad always was sort of balancing, Gandhi and Patel, Gandhi, Patel and Nehru on 3 stools, so to speak, right? And his opinion sort of changed depending on the political situation. At one point, Maulana Azad himself wanted another stint as president. So he realized at some point that he had made a mistake and he should have gone with the consensus and given Patel the place of Congress president. Remember, Patel, even Rajmohan Gandhi 30 years ago writes this, that Patel at that time was perhaps most disappointed at being turned away at that point in 1946, because it was very clear that the person who becomes president at that time will probably get the position of the Prime Minister of India, because it was a natural progression from Congress president to heading the first government. And he knew that if Nehru was being chosen as the Congress president, even at that time, then probably the doors were beginning to close for him as prime minister when India won its independence. So he was, that would have been a bitter thing in his mind. He definitely, and you can see after that, the relationship between Nehru and Patel begins to sour quite dramatically. Months after independence, both men say that they want to quit government, right?
Yes, they do. And
trials and tribulations that they're having between each other.
They do. And you again write that Nehru threatened to leave office. It's another thing that he did no such thing. But be that as it may, I want to bring the discussion to 1946 again, and that is when the cabinet mission came to India.
Yes.
And despite Patel's advice, despite the Congress Party's advice, Pandit Nehru went and started making some very, very intemperate remarks about the cabinet mission and how the Congress would be free to change the rules and so on. And you write in your book that seemed to tip Muhammad Ali Jinnah over the edge, and which led to him declaring the Direct Action Day in Calcutta, and which you write, even though the official death toll from the horrific riots, communal riots there was 5,000, but you write that as many as 16,000 people may have died, mostly Hindus, we will never know. But what exactly was happening there that caused Nehru to become so indisciplined?
Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. At that point in time, it was quite difficult for people to really understand how bad the day would become. And it in fact became very, very bad. It caused a lot of trouble. It brought together bloodshed in Calcutta that was unprecedented. The idea that all of this could be, in a sense, stopped if Nehru had not made certain declarations, which made Jinnah very, very uncomfortable and made Jinnah very insecure, is a charge that hangs like the sword of Damocles on top of our heads as historians who write about this period of history. It is please remember, while Jinnah was, of course, the architect of partition, but it was Muhammad Ali Jinnah who was the first person who said, don't bring religion into politics. No one can dispute that, right? It was Jinnah who basically broke with Gandhi at the Khilafat movement time, right? And later also, when there could be a effort to sort of, in some senses, bring together a certain compromise, I think while Jinnah was certain that he wanted Pakistan, it is true that the Congress also made him insecure. And in 1946, the point that you mentioned, during the cabinet mission plan, it is quite clear that certain comments by Jawaharlal Nehru made Jinnah even more insecure, which drove him even more, with more desperation, towards doing whatever he could, including mass violence, to get his beloved Pakistan.
And in the same vein, when we're talking about when you say that Jinnah broke with the Congress party and Mahatma Gandhi over the issue of religion, it brings into relief a couple of things. The first one is that Sardar Patel said on more than one occasion, and you write in your book, he said that I hate appeasement, and as a result of which he ended up becoming on more than one occasion the fall guy from both sides, the Hindus and the Muslims. But more pertinently, in 1942, if I have got the year right, Maulana Azad was made the Congress party president, and you write that was some sort of an appeasement, tactic by the Congress party, by Mahatma Gandhi, in an attempt to woo the Muslims over to the Congress side, who had started gravitating en masse towards Jinnah and the Muslim League. Is that a fair assessment, that we see clear signs of religious appeasement make their way into the Congress party?
Well, actually, both Patel and Nehru, and in this we must give credit to Patel and Nehru, both of them saw before Gandhi did that actually Jinnah cannot be appeased, right? And he will get his Pakistan at any cost. It is Gandhi who took much more time to come to the realization that partition was inevitable. Whereas Nehru and Patel had seen the future in a sense, and they were under the impression that Jinnah can never be compromised with, and Jinnah can never be, brought on board in a sense. He will get his Pakistan, especially because, remember, I mentioned in my book, there were secret negotiations in a sense where essentially that the British were telling Jinnah that they would ensure that he get Pakistan. So in such a scenario, both Nehru and Patel were very clear that Gandhi's methodology of trying to get Jinnah on board would not work. Remember, till the last moment, Gandhi actually suggested that Jinnah be made prime minister so that India can remain together. Thankfully, both Patel and Nehru realized that this would completely not work, and this would be completely be unstable and would destroy India from inside. Therefore, they completely refused to accept this argument and this solution.
And so since now we are talking about partition, I want to ask you, often in national media, and you have certain intellectuals who will start making statements that it was Veer Savarkar or it was someone else who first floated the idea of a separate Pakistan, a separate country based on the basis of religious denomination. And you write in your book, and you quote extensively, that the idea of or basically the two-nation theory owes its existence way back to Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, and then continuing on to, I believe, Shah Wali, and then to the poet Iqbal, and finally to Jinnah. Can you walk us through a little bit through the history of how this theory of the two-nation state came into being?
Absolutely. All the characters you mentioned are very important. Sir Syed Ahmad Khan, of course, one of the first people who spoke about it. Then, of course, Shah Wali, of course, Iqbal, I quote extensively from his letters to Jinnah, where he's mentioning, including with geographical precision, what the shape and size that this Pakistan, this new homeland for the Muslims would take, and what shape it would take. But also remember, there were also Hindus who were, sort of reacting to all this. Savarkar, of course, spoke in terms of two nations for Hindus and Muslims. There were others. I mentioned Hindu Mela, for instance, and many other bodies in Bengal who were also talking about, a separate destiny, in a sense, for Hindus and Muslims. So what happened in that period was there was this, what I would call competitive communalism, right? It became a sort of scenario of competitive communalism where both parties, through comments, were egging on each other, right? And and therefore pushing towards the idea that Hindus and Muslims had separate destinies. The most clear geographical picture of what that destiny would take shape, of course, came from Iqbal. As I said, I quote very extensively from his letters, which I, of course, discovered at Columbia University, where I wrote most of this book, and from books on Iqbal and papers of Iqbal at Columbia University's Great Butler Library, a library you would remember, of course, that Ambedkar himself studied at. And I found a lot of material there. I found a lot of material there, and it's very clear that Iqbal envisions this geographical entity. So before him, of course, there was this talk of separate destinies and separate nations, both from the Hindu side and the Muslim side, for Hindus and Muslims. But Iqbal really concretizes it and mentions even the areas in northwest, at that time, northwest of India, which could take the shape of Pakistan, which is, of course, what happens.
So when it comes to partition, one of the most contentious points of partition is obviously Kashmir is a problem that has been festering now for well over 70 years. And one of the very, very unknown parts of Kashmir is that at one point, you write in your book that Sardar Patel actually talked about settling Sikhs in Kashmir. And by Sikhs, I assume he referred to the Sikhs who would be migrating to India from West Punjab, which then had become Pakistan. So frankly, I had never heard of that before. How credible is that?
Well, it is all mentioned. I mean, these are all documented and with citations. And what we know about partition history, remember also, is obviously always slightly fluid. Because, there are different references at different times. It was a time of enormous violence. More than 1 million people were butchered. So I think we can take it with some caution. But there were definitely clear references to what you talk about.
And so on a slightly different note, one of the key partners in Sardar Patel in helping integrate the more than 550 princely states was a gentleman by the name of V.P. Menon, about whom very, very, very little is now known, thanks to how our history has been treated. Who was V.P. Menon, and what kind of a role did he play? How did he assist Sardar Patel in this mammoth task?
V.P. Menon is a wonderful character. I love the character of V.P. Menon. V.P. Menon is basically was Indian himself as a loyal servant of the Raj, but actually worked to help India and played a stellar role in building and constructing this idea of modern India, putting all these states together. Remember, it was V.P. Menon who put this plan to Sardar Patel on how this entire integration of states and transfer of power could be. And he's the one who stayed with Sardar Patel step by step, unfolding this entire thing over many, many months that they worked together on this, right? So V.P. Menon is a wonderful character. V.P. Menon had the stoicism of a Malayali and the guile, in a sense, of a bureaucrat, right? So he basically was hard-nosed as a Malayali and also had this guile and the steadfastness and also the rigidity of not wavering from what he wants that good bureaucrats often have. So he was a perfect bureaucrat, he was a bureaucrat's bureaucrat. So V.P. Menon was this polite wall behind whom stood the fierce face of Sardar Vallabhbhai Patel, who people were frightened of. And V.P. Menon was a smooth-talking but rigid bureaucrat who delivered the destiny that Sardar Patel wanted for India.
I have to add at this point, and I just remembered that one of the rulers or the kings of Punjab actually put a gun to V.P. Menon's head. Yes. And V.P. Menon could not be bothered.
He was not bothered. V.P. Menon was impossible to fluster. I say sometimes in my lectures that V.P. Menon would have made a great umpire. VP Menon was a classic cricket umpire. VP Menon would have been so good as a cricket umpire. He was unflappable.
So, okay, I think we are running out of time. So I'm going to ask you just one more question and then end with an anecdote, and then we can open it up to our audience for any Q&A that they might have. One of the oft repeated, I think, mistruths or half-lies is that Sardar Patel could not become the prime minister because his health would not allow it. And you write in your book that while it is true that his tireless work during the plague of Ahmedabad had essentially broken his health permanently, it still did not stop this man from traveling to 500 states after independence and stitching India as we know together today. Why has this lie persisted over the decades that Sardar Patel could not become the prime minister because he was too ill or his health would not have permitted it?
Yeah, so I am astonished by it too. My point is very clear. It is clear that Sardar Patel was genuinely unwell. His health had broken down. But if he was so infirm and so weak, how did this man put together this entire country, dealing with all these crazy Rajas and Maharajas, negotiating with them, forcing them? Remember sending the army in Operation Polo into Hyderabad, sending the army into Kashmir. Clearly, these are not signs of a weak man, Abhinav. These are not signs of a man who's tired and is not being able to function. These are moves of a man who's resolute and strong. So if he was strong enough to do all these things, why would he not be strong enough to be a prime minister? It's a question that we must ask ourselves. It's an open-ended question of history. And I have never bought this. I mention in my book, people also say, oh, Sardar Patel was too old to be Congress president. I show in my book that there had been Congress presidents who were older than him. And even later, there would be Congress presidents who would be appointed who would be older than him. It's all given as a data chart in my book, right? So I want to end with one great anecdote. As you said, Sardar Patel ever smiled. There are two critical times when Sardar Patel did smile. One was when he went to the airport in Hyderabad and Nizam, who never used to go anywhere, came to him up at the airport. That famous photograph, Sardar Patel did smile at that time. And the other time when barely days before he died, he had a plane crash, right? And in that plane crash, when the plane is coming down, Sardar Patel is laughing. He's like, well, if death comes, it comes. Two times when Sardar Patel defied all odds and smiled.
Very true, very true. So what I'd like to tell all our listeners and viewers and anyone who watches this recording later is that Sardar Patel is perhaps the best and the finest examples of a statesman, a politician, a leader, and a visionary combined in one that we have had in the last almost 100 years of our history. And to get a better sense and measure of the man, I would strongly encourage people to read the book, buy, beg, borrow, definitely do not steal. Hindal's book that is coming out, it's published by Penguin India. The title of the book is The Man Who Saved India, and it is available for pre-order online on Amazon and other places. So please do read the book. What Hindal has just talked about is but a tiny, tiny glimpse of the fascinating multi-dimensional personality that was Sardar Patel. You also get a very, very good, sort of a rundown through the very interesting times that the nation lived through. So with this, I again thank you, Hindal, for doing this Indic webinar.
Thank you very much.
And I'd request people to please follow us on Twitter. And when you get the chance, also go to the Indic Book Club website at www.indicbookclub.com and take a look at it. It is sort of a Goodreads for all our Indic viewers, lovers of books, and everyone. So with that, let's turn this open to Q&A. And if people have any questions, they can they can ask those questions. And I'm going to go through the chat and see if any questions have come in through the chat. And let's see. So Hindal, we do have a few questions. One is from Abhishek Banerjee. who writes, "We know Nehru was very much of an Anglophile. How did Sardar Patel view the British?"
Could you repeat that question again?
So Abhishek Banerjee's question, Hindol, is, "We know Nehru was very much of an Anglophile. How did Sardar Patel view the British?"
I'm afraid I could not hear that question. I'll just see if I can see that question. Um,
The question is by Abhishek Banerjee, Hindolji.
Yes, Anglophile. I can see the question right now, and I'm happy to answer that question right away. Yes, that was a big difference between Sardar Patel and Pandit Nehru. Pandit Nehru was a classic England-trained Anglophile man of the world, whereas Sardar Patel remained a very rooted, devoted to peasantry, son of a farmer. I say in my book that one thing that is very rarely understood in the debate between Nehru and Patel is that there is a class difference. Nehru came from one of the wealthiest families in India, whereas Patel was a son of a farmer. That's a very clear class difference between the two that cannot be ignored when you consider both of them.
Very true. And in fact, you write in your book again, Hindol, that Mahatma Gandhi said of Nehru that in Nehru I have an Englishman in our party, and he viewed it as some sort of a positive. He viewed it positively. But
yes, and Nehru himself said that he was the last Englishman to rule India, as you know. Pandit Nehru himself said that he was the last Englishman to rule India. Let's just say that Sardar Patel could never be called the last Englishman if he had ruled India.
Very true.
I also see another question by Harikiran Vadlamani, who asks, can the book be made into a movie? Yes, absolutely. I envisage this book to be made into a movie, quite like The Darkest Hour, which has been made recently on Winston Churchill. It could be a movie, a very exciting movie about this one old dying man against the empire and against all these Rajas and Maharajas desperately fighting to keep India together. It would be a fascinating film if it's made into a film.
And I hope such a movie is indeed made. Okay, so there's one more question, and it is remarkable in its brevity, but I don't think the answer could be so succinct in any case. I would encourage him or her to read the book. But the question is, how did Sardar Patel view Nehru?
Well, I think Sardar Patel and Nehru had a very complicated relationship. I think sometimes in debate, these things are made over simple. They were very close to each other. All these men were extremely close to each other. They were like family to each other. But having said that, they had extremely large differences which cannot be ignored. They fought very hard on Kashmir. They disagreed on many critical things. They had an entirely different way of looking at India, including, remember, Sardar Patel sent RSS's Golwalkar to convince Maharaja Hari Singh to join the Indian Union, even though he's the one who banned the RSS, but he's the one who lifted the ban on the RSS also. So Nehru and Sardar Patel looked at India in very different ways, but they were also very close to each other, and there was a certain familial feeling that they felt for each other. They had spent most of their lives with each other. So it cannot be made into very simplistic polemical points. It was a difficult and complicated relationship.
Very true, very true. And I think it cannot be pigeonholed into simple binaries, but I think the book does give a fascinating glimpse into how the dynamic played out over the years. So I think I would like to end this, unless not there are any more questions coming in. I'd like to again end this by thanking you, Hindol, for your time, and to all our
Thank
viewers.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Really enjoyed it. Thank you, Indic Academy. Thank you, Abhinav. As always, wonderful to talk to all of you.
Thank you, Hindol, and thank you, everyone, and have a good day.
Bye.
Bye.
Looking forward to your participation in the next Indic chat. Namaste. Thank you.
Thank you.